Hi everyone. Today we're going to start working with TL, our truth functional language. So the first thing we should do is make sure everyone understands the syntax of TL, in particular the vocabulary. We are using capital letters as our sentence constants, and we're allowed to use any capital letter A through Z. If we run out of capital letters at that point, we are allowed to use subscripts, but we won't get there in this course. Also of note are our sentence operators. There they are. Those should be familiar to you since you were supposed to have studied them last time. And lastly, our grouping indicators. We are using parentheses and brackets. We are not allowed to use curly braces or curly brackets because those are designated for demarcating sets. We're only going to use those for sets. So that'll come into play later on. All you need to know right now is that we are only using parentheses and brackets. Okay, here are the rules of grammar. Any sentence constant alone, that's a well-formed formula. If we have a well-formed formula already, and then on top of that we negate it, we slap a tilde on there, that is also a well-formed formula of TL. And lastly, if you have two separate well-formed formulas, P and Q are the meta variables representing them right now, and you add some binary connective like the wedge or the ampersand or the horseshoe or the triple bar, then that is also a sentence of TL. So as we practice some more, we'll get a hang of what this really means. Let's go ahead and look at some examples now. Okay, let's do some practice problems. We're going to be very playful here. There is no meaning to the sentence constants that we're using. So let's just use A, B, C, D, okay? Write a well-formed formula that contains two letter constants and one ampersand. Okay, so how about this? Those are two sentence constants, A and B, and we said we were going to use an ampersand. So there it is. As we noted in the important concepts above, you are allowed to, in this class, drop the outermost parentheses. So technically that's how you write this formula, but we are allowing this to be the case. This is because eventually we're going to have so many parentheses and other grouping indicators that it'll just be easier to drop at least one pair of them. Besides, there is no ambiguity here. We know what this means, so that's why we're going to allow it. Okay, back to this. Write a well-formed formula that contains three sentence constants, one ampersand, and one wedge. Okay, well, let's not make this complicated. Let's just add a C on there. As a matter of fact, I liked the previous sentence formula, so we're going to just bring that one back. And all we need to do now is add a wedge. So if we add it there, that is a perfectly well-formed formula. We have on the left a conjunction, and on the right we have C, and the entire sentence is a disjunction. So we can see there that the main operator is the wedge, and to its left it covers all the way to the opening parentheses on the far left. And on the right, it's just one sentence constant, but the wedge definitely covers that. It's within its scope. So that is a well-formed formula. Technically, again, we are supposed to include the outermost parentheses typically, right? But again, in this class, we are allowing for the convention that we would drop those outermost parentheses. So this is okay. Again, there is no ambiguity here. We know what this says. Lastly, write a well-formed formula that contains four-letter constants, one tilde, two ampersands, and a horseshoe. Okay, I added there D, since we need four sentence constants total. And we definitely need a tilde. So remember, a tilde is a unary connective. It applies just to one thing, whatever is to its right. So since we're introducing this new sentence constant D, I figured might as well put the tilde on that one. Again, A, B, C, D don't mean anything right now, so sort of doesn't matter. And we definitely need the horseshoe. We need to add that. So as it stands right now, this is not a well-formed formula. It's not clear what the horseshoe applies to. Does it apply to everything on its left, or is it only to the C? So we need to make sure we add grouping indicators here so that we can demarcate the scope of the horseshoe. I am, again, because these letters don't mean anything, I'm going to just go ahead and do this sentence right here. I'm going to go ahead and bracket off or parenthesize the conditional just with C and not D. That'll be the sentence that I make. I could have done this too. Take a look at that. It doesn't really matter in this case. I'm going to go ahead and stick with this one. This is a good example or a good time to mention that, again, the main operator is the operator with the largest scope, and your parentheses help you kind of figure out which one the main operator is. So for number 3, the main operator is, again, the wedge. To its left we have a conjunction, and to its right we have a conditional, and inside that conditional there's a negation. But really the operator with the largest scope really is the wedge. That's why it is the main operator. By the way, per the question that we saw earlier, it's actually supposed to be an ampersand, so let me just switch that now, and there you go. Now the main operator is an ampersand. It actually has more to do with location and how it applies to the entire formula, both left and right. That's what makes something a main operator. Okay, let's do a little task that I think is useful. We're going to go ahead and prove that this here formula is a well-formed formula. So tilde, open parentheses, tilde A, wedge, tilde B, close parentheses. Okay. So the way that you prove this is a well-formed formula is you start from the inside and work your way out. Now ultimately this is a negation. Notice that outermost tilde, the tilde on the far left, that applies immediately, that applies to what is to its right, and that is the opening parentheses, which means that tilde applies to everything within the parentheses, which is the entire formula. So this sentence is a negation, and so we know that that'll be our last step. But let's work our way there. First of all, we need to show that A, the smallest constituent there, well, I guess it's a tie between A and B, but A is definitely a well-formed formula per rule 1. Remember, any sentence constant alone is a well-formed formula. Same goes for B. Okay, so far so good. Now, per rule 2, we know that if you put a tilde on a well-formed formula, that is also a well-formed formula. So, tilde A is a WFF, as is tilde B. Okay, now that we've done that, we need to connect tilde A and tilde B, that is with the wedge, and the rule that allows us to use the wedge is rule 3. Rule 3 is what allows us to connect two well-formed formulas through either a wedge or an ampersand, a horseshoe, or a triple bar. So there is rule 3 allowing us to do that. And last but not least, as I mentioned earlier, this whole thing is ultimately a negation. So at the very end we reuse rule 2 and we say, well, if open parentheses tilde A, wedge, tilde B, close parentheses is a WFF, then so is all that plus a tilde at the very beginning. It's the negation of the entire thing. So that is how you prove a well-formed formula. I won't test you on these directly, but you will need to know the basic rules. So it's a useful exercise to go over again in the future. Okay, let's move on. Tips on translating from a natural language to TL. I wanted to show you a couple of examples as to how this works, and I think the connective that gives people usually the most trouble is the conditional, or the horseshoe. So let's translate this sentence. If it is sunny and I feel energized, we'll jog. Well, notice that there's two words here typically in a conditional, if and then. And so first thing that people want to do is they want to put two horseshoes on here, but that is not how you do this. The horseshoe is actually read, if it's the main operator of the sentence, you actually have to just read in that if, even though the horseshoe is still in the middle of the sentence. So in this case, to the left of the horseshoe, the antecedent, we have S and E standing for it being sunny and you feeling energized. And those are in parentheses because those are the conditions that must be met if you are going to do the thing that's to the right of the horseshoe, which is go jogging. So this is the correct way to diagram or to translate this into TL. Let's get a more complicated sentence. Okay, a bit of a Seinfeld reference here. Go ahead and think out, you can pause here and think how you're supposed to translate this to TL. Okay, hopefully you have something like this. Now if you notice, again, it's only one horseshoe. I know that the if then, you feel like putting a horseshoe in the beginning for some reason. No, it just goes right in the middle. And the antecedent are the conditions, and the consequent is the result. So if Elaine orders soup and Jerry orders soup, if those two things happen, that's why E and J are in parentheses, then, horseshoe, either George will order soup or Newman orders soup. So that's when the G, wedge, N come into play. Alright, so I hope those are helpful. One more case that I just want to point out here. Sometimes there are ambiguous sentences when people like to come up with their own sentences to translate. And sometimes sentences are unfortunately ambiguous. That's one of the problems with natural language. So this sentence might be clear enough. It is not the case that Anne is home but Bob is home. You should always translate but like an and, like an ampersand. As there is a handout in last lesson that will show you that, so make sure to go look at that too. So in this case, it's pretty clear. Anne is at home and Bob is home. So that's this one. But if we just change one word in this English sentence, then it's not really clear what is being said. It is not the case that Anne is home and Bob is home. So is it the case that they're both not home, or if one's home and the other one's not home, or what's going on here? So technically, you can translate it this way, or you can translate it this way. These ambiguous sentences are something you have to watch out for if you're coming up with your own problems. I actually won't use these on the test or in any of my homework assignments. I try to speak in non-ambiguous ways. So this is just something that I want to point out, A, because it's instructive, but B, because if you come up with your own translations, you might accidentally pick an ambiguous sentence, and then you end up having to translate two sentences of TL. It requires two in that case. Any possible interpretation must be written out, basically. Okay. Scope and main operator. So you should have already covered this, but I just wanted to say a couple of things about this. Remember that the main operator is that connected with the largest scope, and this really does matter here. So in the example in the center, open bracket A and B, close bracket, wedge C, and A ampersand open bracket B wedge C, close bracket, those are almost identical if you notice, but really that placement of the brackets makes all the difference. Let's just say we're talking about apples, bananas, and carrots. The first sentence, the one on the left, says you can have either apples and bananas or carrots. And the second sentence says you can have apples and bananas or carrots. So these are not the same thing at all. Just think that choice out for yourself and you'll realize, oh yeah, these are definitely two different options. So placing the brackets, where you place them is important. And the main reason why I'm talking about it right now is because in the first sentence, that placement of the brackets makes the main operator a wedge. That is a disjunction. But in the second sentence, the placement of the brackets makes the main operator the ampersand, so that's a conjunction. So that makes all the difference. Make sure when you are translating, you are paying attention to that, and make sure you're familiar, obviously, with main operators as well, because that's extremely important. Okay. So looking at our sentences that we made earlier, let's go ahead and just practice finding the main operators for each of these. For number one, it's actually pretty easy. There's actually only one operator there, and that's the ampersand, and that is in fact the main operator. Let's look at sentence number two. Is it the ampersand again? Well, the ampersand applies to what is to its left and its right, and to the left it has an A, to the right it has a B, but there's so much more in that formula that the ampersand is not applying to. That means that the ampersand is not the main connective. So what's the only other connective there? It's the wedge. So the wedge to its left applies to the closing parentheses, which means it applies to everything that's within the parentheses. That means that to its left it applies to the entire conjunction, and to its right it applies to the C. That is the entire formula, hence you have found the main operator. It is that wedge. Okay. Now for number three, we could try the ampersand again, but we know it's not the case. What about this tilde? Is that the main operator? Tildes apply only to what is immediately to the right, which in this case is D. Well, there is much more to this formula besides D, so the tilde is not the main operator either. Okay, what about the horseshoe? To the left of the horseshoe, it applies to the C. To the right, it applies to the tilde D. That now becomes a unit. But again, there's so much more to this formula than just C and tilde D, so the horseshoe is also not the main operator. Finally, this ampersand to its left has a conjunction in parentheses. To its right, it has a conditional in parentheses. This means that this conjunction here, this ampersand, applies to literally the entire formula, and so yes, this is the main operator. Have fun practicing.